So, what do you think? You think you're gonna pull it off?
What, the whole thing?
Yeah.
God willing.
You believe in God?
It beats the alternative.
I think for a lot of people who are on a journey of faith, maybe from somewhere where they're not a believer, it's a perfectly acceptable place to be, where we're setting up hypotheses and we either hypothesize that God is real or we hypothesize that God is not. And until you have something else to go on, I think it's a perfectly reasonable place. Even a lot of people who feel like they're believers hit moments in their lives where maybe that is the best they can do, is that it's better than God not being real. And just leaving it open for the possibility is enough. And I love what Strat said because it sure beats the alternative.
Welcome to Holy Earth, where we talk about faith and earth stewardship. I'm Lydia Theobald.
And I'm Phil Fernberg. Lydia, how are you doing?
Doing so good, but the question is, how are you? Aren't you in Iceland right now?
I am. I am in a hotel room in Iceland right now, and it's a good time. We've been going around Scandinavia. We're developing a study abroad experience for our students, so it's been lovely. My awe and wonder is checked.
Wow, that sounds amazing. You'll have to show us pics later.
Absolutely. Would love to. I have been enjoying, though, thinking about the content of this episode and the things that we are going to be making this summer when I get back from this trip. And speaking of the content we're making, we want to let all you listeners know that if you enjoy our content and you haven't yet subscribed, to please go and do so. And to leave likes, comments, reviews, all of these things really help the show to grow and help us to reach more listeners like you.
I'm really looking forward to this episode. This one has a pop culture focus, which is different from what we've done before, unless you count that time that someone commented that you look like Brandon Flowers and that I look like I could be on Secret Lives of Mormon Wives. But this one will be great. We're going to talk about evolution, biology, and faith in the popular book and movie Project Hail Mary, with biology professor Jamie Jensen. Jamie is an academic superstar and an expert on the intersection of faith and science. She is also, like us, a huge fan of Project Hail Mary. Spoiler alert, we're going to talk about some of the plot details of Project Hail Mary, but we won't talk about how it ends, but we probably would still recommend that you watch or read it, whatever you're planning to do before you watch this episode. But before we start our conversation, let's bring in our producer, Marcia Maxwell, for our stewardship story.
Hi, guys. Phil, I'm in awe that you're over in Iceland. That is very cool. You get it? It's Iceland.
It's
Yeah.
very cool.
I saw what you
That's
did
a
there,
good one.
Marcia.
Marcia, what do you have for us today?
Okay, I have a couple things. Number one, I want to remind all of our listeners about the 2026 Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship Art and Writing Contest. The theme this year is Every Good Tree, and selected entries will be featured in our October Fall Forum at Utah Valley University, on our blog, in our newsletter, on our social media, and on the Our Trees website, which is produced by National Geographic explorer Nalini Nadkarni. And on top of that, we have cash prizes, so please send us your entries, and you can find more information about that in the show notes. I'm thinking of a little thing I might write for it.
Oh.
Okay, and number two for today's stewardship story, I want to set the stage by talking about a Reddit thread. So I spend time looking around the internet for stories about Latter-day Saints and Earth stewardship, and I came across this Reddit thread. And so for what it's worth, the original poster said, I wish church leaders would talk more about caring for the earth. They never talk about it. And then there was a lot of replies in agreement with that statement. And then some people mentioned the idea that they've heard that it doesn't matter what we do to the earth because someday Jesus will come and restore everything. So those comments just reminded me, it took me back to our first episode with George Handley because we talked about some of these things. We talked about how Earth stewardship has always been a part of the gospel, but historically in our tradition, it probably hasn't been talked about enough. And that's one of the reasons why Latter-day Saint Earth stewardship exists. And also we talked about it's a misconception, the idea that We don't have to care for the earth because Jesus is going to restore it. And if we think about what it means to be a steward doesn't make a mess and then ask someone else to clean it up. So that's just a little bit of stage setting. I know you all have feelings about that because we just talked about these things. But with those ideas in mind, I wanted to share something useful and powerful that is recent from the church about caring for the earth. So this is an article from the church's official website, and it lists a bunch of practical things we can do to care for the earth. So I've linked that in the show notes. I encourage our listeners to go and take a look at it. It's very simple and approachable. So number one suggestion that they make is learn from gospel resources why sustainability matters. And we can learn this by studying the scriptures, conference talks, and by contemplation, by just thinking about what our values are. Number two, seek God's guidance through prayer. Ask how you can contribute to sustainability. Number three, rejoice in nature. We love to do this, right? We sing hymns. We spend time enjoying natural spaces. Number four, improve energy efficiency in your home. Number five, conserve water. Number six, reduce material waste, which is reduce, reuse, recycle. Number seven, reduce transportation emissions. So whatever you drive, try to drive less, maybe walk. Think about that. Number eight, protect biodiversity. Number nine, cultivate a garden. Number 10, plant trees. We've been talking about that a ton. Number 11, change your diet to emphasize more sustainable foods. Number 12, incorporate sustainability in ward activities. Number 13, join sustainability efforts in your local community. So I want to emphasize, we don't have to do all those things at the same time. We can just pick one, pick whichever one calls to you, pray about what you can do, and just work on these things one at a time or a few at a time, just getting a little bit better every day. And another thing I wanted to share was a quote from Elder Patrick Kearon that was in the article. It says, "A unified effort where governments, faith and community leaders, media, industry, scholars, and families work together is the way to achieve the noble goal of revitalizing the earth and the greater human family. May we accept this as a sacred charge."
Beautiful. I love just collecting them all into all those great ideas into one place. And it just makes me think about how similar it is to our approach to the gospel as a whole, where there are so many good things to do, so many things for us to work on, both individually and as communities. And the approach of the gospel is, hey, pray and ask, like, where do I start? And start with what you can do, and don't get overwhelmed with all of the things that need to happen. Just like trust in God and do what you can as you're led by him. So I think that's so beautiful.
I would put forth a challenge to our listeners that if you could pick one of these things and start integrating it into your life, to send us a story about it. Want to hear how it changes the way that you see stewardship in your life.
Beautiful. Let's do it. Okay, well, thank you, Marcia. We love
Thank
that.
you.
Well, that was great. Thanks, Marcia. Okay, well, we are excited for our episode today with Dr. Jamie Jensen, who's an award-winning professor of biology at Brigham Young University. She specializes in improving biology teaching through evidence-based instructional practices and overcoming barriers at the intersection of science and religion. She's an outstanding science communicator with a long list of both scholarly and public-facing publications. Her books include Let's Talk About Faith and Science, published by Deseret Book, and The Restored Gospel of Jesus Christ in Evolution, published by BYU Life Sciences. Jamie is the mother of 4 handsome boys and loves reading, sewing, and dissecting. Ooh, let's hear a little bit more about that, maybe. Welcome, Jamie.
Hi, nice to be with you.
Hey, we love dissecting as a hobby in the list. That's a new one for us.
Yes, all growing up with my kids, if a bird ran into the window or we caught a fish or we found a frog on the beach, we would, as long as it was dead, we would dissect it.
Whoa.
We once dissected a snake on the beach that inside was a frog that we then dissected. It was amazing.
Whoa, that's super cool. Okay, well, we're super excited to chat about Project Hail Mary with you. But first, we want to just hear about you. How did you become a person of science as well as a person of faith? And then how did you develop your expertise in exploring the synergy between LDS theology and organic evolution?
Yeah, I'll try to be brief with this. I've always grown up loving science. My grandfather was a huge inspiration to me. He was a nuclear physicist and always emphasized science and would encourage me in anything that I was doing. And so I did grow up in a Latter-day Saint home, but it was sort of non-traditional in that my mom was a convert and My grandfather was not a member. And so for me, there was never really an issue between science and religion. But as I started going through high school, I noticed some of my friends struggling. And then especially once I got into graduate school and was interacting much more with people who were not of faith, who were maybe unnecessarily pitting science and religion together, I thought, wait a minute, this isn't a problem. And what did I miss? And as I learned more and more about it, I could see that there was certainly a communication barrier between scientists and people of faith. And then when I got to BYU and saw that my students were struggling, it became a passion for me to try to figure out how to overcome these barriers. And then I've just been blessed with lots of experiences with really wonderful colleagues and working with the people at the Smithsonian of different faith traditions has been really helpful in opening my eyes to the different ways you can view this. And then I had a great chance at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute to work with some really great people on science communication specifically. And so, yeah, so that's kind of how I got into it and how I've gained the expertise I need to be working at this boundary.
Very cool. As you were talking, I was thinking about the explanation that I've heard that science tells us the how and religion tells us the why. Does that feel like a helpful frame for you?
It can be. Sometimes it doesn't always fit, right? Because in science, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out why in a different sense, right? Not why is in the purpose of life and why we are here, but why is in what causes phenomena.
Yeah.
It does work in a lot of places. Yeah.
Okay. In just a broad, generalized way.
Before we get to talking about Project Hail Mary, because this is going to be a fun episode, I am a total cinephile and I'm very excited for this conversation. The other part I wanted to delve into a little bit more is the evolution side of things that you have. So we've had a little bit of peaks and valleys with belief about where the role of evolution is in the religion. You know, there's been times when they've talked about things like organic evolution being a fundamental part of the religion. Then there's other times where, for example, in Mormon doctrine, Bruce R. McConkie wrote, there's no harmony between the truths of revealed religion and the theories of organic evolution. And there's passages from the Bible, Book of Mormon, and D&C and Pearl of Great Price that have been interpreted to imply that there was no death on earth before the fall. So you've talked and written a lot about the seeming contrast between science and scripture, and I know it's a huge topic. There's a lot we can unpack there, but just kind of briefly wanted to know, from in the general sense, how you think about the science of evolution and its relationship to faith and scripture.
Oh my goodness. I mean, that's such a huge question. And I would encourage people to go read my book or visit our website, the recoevo.byu.edu. There's a lot of resources there because this is such a huge question. And I think partly the reason we've seen changes over time is that science has developed over time. So a lot of the statements that you see from like Mormon doctrine or Man, His Origin and Destiny from a long time ago, the theories of evolution that they were talking about then, they hardly resemble what we know now, right? And there's a really great quote by the First Presidency in 1910 that says, "That which is demonstrated, we accept with joy." And I would argue that at the time that a lot of the controversy was going on, it wasn't well demonstrated. I mean, some was and some wasn't, but I would say today evolution is very well demonstrated for all of life, including humans. And so at this point, I think that were those people like Bruce R. McConkie or Joseph Fielding Smith alive now and looking at the evidence, I don't know that they would have made the same statements, if that makes sense. I think that they were a highly intelligent people and were working with what they had to work with at the time. And it's important to emphasize that the church's doctrine towards evolution is neutral, including human evolution. And there's a really great Gospel Topics essay on organic evolution on the website. And so as far as my opinion goes, evolution to me is very well demonstrated. I just see it as a tool through which God created life on earth, the tool through which God created our bodies. It certainly doesn't negate God's existence. It's just we're getting a glimpse into his handiwork.
For our listeners, is there a difference when you say organic evolution versus just evolution?
No, I don't know why the church's statements all append organic onto that. I think now, from the research that I've done with students, sometimes when I say evolution, they'll start talking about the learning of our spirits to be perfected, and they'll call that evolution. So I think what the church is trying to
Distinguish.
set apart, distinguish, is that we're talking about the evolution of organic beings, life on earth. Yeah.
Okay, so what is, like, in the classes you teach, what's the official thesis on human evolution?
Yeah, so humans are part of the animal kingdom and we are subject to all the same laws and rules that the rest of the animal kingdom is subject to. And so the way that our bodies were created shouldn't be any different than the way that a squirrel or a bear or a horse was created. And so the official, within the scientific community, humans evolved just like anything else. Our species itself, Homo sapiens, have been on the earth for upwards of around 300,000 years. And then there were lots of primitive hominins before that, tracing all the way back to a common ancestor with what we now see as the great apes and chimpanzees around 5 to 7 million years ago.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I feel like I need to spend some time on the website and learning about it. So
We've got
I'll
a
do that.
course on human evolution specifically, where I actually take our audience through the dig sites in South Africa and some of the paleoanthropology that's going on there and help them understand how we know what we know about human evolution.
So cool. We'll link that in the show notes for everyone to look at so we can all explore that together. Okay, well let's dive into Project Hail Mary and kind of connect this discussion, connect it with biology, evolution, and faith. So let's see if we can play the clip from the movie and then we'll let Jamie kind of comment on it.
Must be hard having to ask everybody to, you know.
Actually, it isn't.
Yeah. So, what do you think? You think you're gonna pull it off?
What, the whole thing?
Yeah.
God willing.
You believe in God?
It beats the alternative.
Okay, so yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts as a person of faith and science. What does this scene say to you and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I love this scene actually. And I think for a lot of people who are on a journey of faith, maybe from somewhere where they're not a believer, it's a perfectly acceptable place to be, right? Where we're setting up hypotheses and we either hypothesize that God is real or we hypothesize that God is not. And I would say that the hypothesis that he's real does beat the alternative. And until you have something else to go on, I think it's a perfectly reasonable place to be. And I think even a lot of people who feel like they're believers hit moments in their lives where maybe that is the best they can do, is that it's better than God not being real. And just leaving it open for the possibility that God is there and God is real is enough for God to be able to manifest himself to you. And I've actually had this conversation with students quite a few times where they come to my office and say, hey, I think I'm losing my testimony, or I never hear the spirit and I don't know if God is real. And that's often the advice I give them, is just be open to the possibility that God is there. And I love what Strat said because it sure beats the alternative.
Yeah, and I love that it shows her not just as this like cold,
Right.
perfectly rational, mission-driven person that has no fears or no hopes. Like she obviously has faith and has hope, and it's interesting how that kind of creates a sense of vulnerability too. Not just, oh, we have a perfect mission that is going to succeed, but oh, it might not work, but we are kind of putting trust in a higher being to help us out. So I think that's beautiful.
So there's a couple of scriptures that come to mind that I'd be curious to know if we did a little comparative. And I don't know if you were doing this at all when you saw the movie, of just kind of, I sometimes do this when a movie scenes catch me and say, wow, this really relates back to some of our scriptures or some of our theology. In Moses 1:33, God says, worlds without number have I created. And in D&C 76:24, it says the inhabitants of these worlds are begotten sons and daughters unto God. How would you compare those to Project Hail Mary's depiction of life emerging in different places in the universe, and for, you know, from both a biological and a theological perspective? I'm curious if you have any similar sort of reactions.
I did actually. So my sons and I read this book together before the movie came out. We actually finished it like 2 weeks before the movie came out. And then we went to the movie premiere on my son's birthday. We had those same conversations with each other. My sons are 14 and 18. They still let me read to them every night, which I feel so grateful. And we had these conversations about how there really probably is life out there. And for it to start in multiple places, it makes a lot of sense. What it looks like and all of that, obviously, we're just speculating. But that was one of the things that I loved about the book was that scientifically, it's pretty accurate to what could be the case.
Yeah. And then along those lines, Rocky is a species that has emerged in a different solar system, 12 light years from Grace's home planet Earth. But he still has a lot of like human-like characteristics, which connects to our scriptures talking about how we're made in the image and likeness of God. So how do you think about beings created in the image and likeness of God? And could we describe Rocky as a being created in the image and likeness of God?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think people interpret this a lot of times in very different ways. I'm going to borrow from a friend of mine. So Jim Miller, he's a Presbyterian, and he is the co-chair of the Human Origins Project, the Broader Social Impacts Committee of the Human Origins Project at the Smithsonian. I work with him. He wrote a book called Where Did We Come From? And it's a guide to religious parents on how to help their kids figure out this whole evolution thing. It talks about being in the image of God. And he talks about all creatures being in the image of God in that they are fulfilling a divine purpose and that they are doing God's will. And we don't really know what God meant. I mean, we know from our Latter-day Saint theology, we know that Joseph Smith saw God the Father and the Son, Jesus Christ, and we know that we look an awful lot like them. And so you could be very literal and say, we are really like spitting image in the image of God. But I think in the image of God also implies that we are willing to do his will and that we are part of his plan and that we have the ability to have the creative powers that he has. And that would imply a much broader definition of the image of God. And so, yeah, like I would say if Rocky really were a real creature, he's in the image of God just like we are.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting to think about.
Let's talk a little bit about microbes and pathogens. I am curious to know your thoughts on the astrophage. So another non-human creature important in Project Hail Mary. And for me, the idea the whole universe could be infected by a pathogen that's actually one of the most compelling thoughts that I had from reading the book and watching the movie. Like Rocky, this pathogen could be described as one of God's creations, yet it's killing the universe. And I'm wondering how you think we understand that, because I think this goes for what happens on Earth too, right? We have pathogens, we have bacteria that when in a certain concentration, they're deadly to other animals, to us, as humans. So how do we understand this as God's creations, even though they are in many ways threatening and or alien to us?
Yeah. So I actually, when I thought about that, as you were saying that, I thought, gosh, I didn't even think of it that way. I thought of it much more in terms of systems biology, that they're not evil, like pathogens. And if you read the Project Hail Mary, the astrophage is actually part of an ecosystem on, what's the name of the planet? They named it after Rocky's wife. I can't remember the name of it, but where they go and they find the Talmiba, right? And the Talmiba is the predator of astrophage.
Arid?
On Talmiba, Arid's where Rocky's, right?
They name it Adrian, don't they?
Adrian, yes, thank you. On the planet Adrian,
yes, you're right.
in that
Yes.
City, where astrophage is not destroying the sun, because astrophage is in a symbiotic relationship in a balanced ecosystem with Talmiba and potentially other predators that are keeping things in check. The same thing is true here on Earth, right? And so I don't look at astrophage as an enemy somehow or an alien. It's just a creature that's been taken out of its habitat where its checks and balances aren't there. And it does different things. We see this all the time on Earth, right? When we go in as humans and we might destroy a particular predator in an environment, and all of a sudden the prey that were in checked balance become a problem, right? Or we introduce species like the cane toad in Australia, or rabbits actually and foxes that we introduced into Australia, where all of a sudden they're out of their native ecosystem. And it isn't their fault that they're all of a sudden becoming a problem to the ecosystem. It's our fault. And I remember as I was reading the book thinking, what happened. I was so curious, what was the disturbance that caused Astrophage to jump from an area where it was in perfect balance with other organisms to an area where it was not in balance. And I would guess that if this were a real story, that there would be an explainable disturbance phenomenon that happened that caused it to be out of balance. And given enough time, it would come back into balance. And pathogens on Earth are the same way, right? Bacteria that infect us, viruses that kill us, they're just living in an ecosystem where there are checks and balances, and you can't really ascribe like alien or evil to it. It's just part of the system that's been disrupted.
It's hard to overcome, though, those ideas of, originating in germ theory, right? Like this with COVID fresh on our minds, all these sorts of things, people just feel, this is bad. But I think that that's taken a really good point. When you see sort of, I think of one of our previous guests, Darren Perry, who was talking about indigenous ways of knowing, and something that his Shoshone grandmother would always tell him, which is that don't call it an invasive plant. It's just a plant that's lost. It needs to be brought back to where its true home is. And I thought that's a really great and sort of, humanizing or I guess you could say anthropomorphizing way of looking at it. But it's an interesting thought. And let's talk about that actually in working in symbiosis, because the other microbe that we talk about is the Talmoeba, which you already mentioned. Rocky and Grace discover Talmoeba together, and that it eats Astrophage. And so it's a microbe that's going to save the universe, or at least Earth and Arid and Rocky's home planet. But as Rocky and Grace breed the Talmoeba, they need to save their home planets. The Talmoeba mutates to penetrate xenonite and the material that Rocky's ship is made of. So this puts Rocky and his ship in danger, because now the Talmoeba could eat the ship's astrophage fuel. So what does this detail of the story tell us about the complexities of evolution, especially when scientists try to control or manipulate it? I know you mentioned systems biology. I love systems and complexity theory. This might be something relevant there. I don't know. What's your thoughts?
Honestly, that was my favorite part of the book. My favorite part of the book is when Grace discovers that Talmoeba can penetrate xenonite. And I thought, I am so glad that he took such an accurate lens of natural selection. And artificial selection actually is what was happening in that case. And that's exactly what would happen, right? That when so if you haven't read the book, and the movie doesn't go into the details like the book does. And so if you don't understand what was going on, basically what they realized when they discovered the Talmoeba is that it, in its home planet, Adrian, and that solar system with Tau Ceti, the nitrogen levels were way, way low. And whereas in our system, nitrogen is really high. And so when Grace puts the Talmoeba into a container with the right percentage of nitrogen that you would find in our solar system, it dies. And so he realizes, we can't send it back to Earth this way. So he decides he's going to set up a series of experiments where he's going to put a bunch into a box, and he's going to put just a tiny bit of nitrogen. And those with random mutations that allow them to survive that nitrogen are the ones that survive and reproduce. And then he moves them to the next box with slightly higher nitrogen. We do this all the time with antibiotics, right? That's how we get antibiotic resistant germs, pathogens, is that we just keep dosing them, and the ones with random mutations that allow them to survive it are the ones that survive, and then we have to dose them higher because they're not dying, and eventually we end up with a strain that's completely resistant to antibiotics. So that's what he was doing with resistance to nitrogen. But there's always unintended consequences of artificial selection. There's always, and that's one of the things that's a big misconception about evolution. I'm super excited. Can you tell? I get talking really fast. One of the misconceptions about evolution is that it's somehow a process going towards perfection, and that there's just a one-tracked mind, like, I'm going to fly, and so eventually I'm going to develop wings and fly. That's not how it works. A lot of times the traits that get selected for were doing something different. Like feathers in birds were not originally for flight, right? And they were in dinosaurs, and they were for either sexual displays or for warmth or some kind of sexual selection. So with the Talmoeba, what the side effect was is they were also putting these Talmoeba in a xenonite box where they were dying of nitrogen exposure. And so not only were we selecting for those that could resist the nitrogen, we were selecting for those that could escape the box, right? And that was just a consequence that they didn't even think about, that they would also be able to escape the box. And so what he ends up with is a nitrogen-resistant Talmoeba that's also able to penetrate xenonite. And was just so clever. And it was this little detail about evolution that probably most readers just skipped over. But I was like geeking out over it and telling my kids all about it. And isn't that awesome? And what other things did they accidentally breed for when they're doing this? And we do this all the time with livestock and with agriculture, where we're breeding for certain things. And then we get these other weird things that happen because evolution is very much kind of a random process. What mutants happen, right? And then selection happens. So it was a really cool part of the story and just shows you how complex these systems are. Yeah.
So interesting. Okay, so now I'm thinking about kind of that process of selection and survival of the fittest. And that's kind of what early Darwinism focused on, as I understand it, as like the driving force in evolution. But more recently, it's become evident that inter and intra-species cooperation is also a critical feature of evolution. And we see that in the relationship between Rocky and Grace, which I think is like the sweetest part of the whole film. And there's not a lot of characters in the movie, so you're just like, oh, we're just going on Ryan Gosling's amazing personality and then this sweet, sweet relationship that just works out so well. But so how do you think about cooperation through both a scientific and a theological lens and as a stewardship?
Yeah, so I mean, cooperation, some people like to pit it against like natural selection, survival of the fittest versus cooperation. They're the same process, right? So the process that selects for traits that allow you to reproduce better. That's what natural selection is. And so if you are cooperative, and you saw it with Rocky and Grace, right? If they had not had the ability to cooperate with each other, neither one would survive, right? And so this ability for humans, especially, to cooperate actually allows us to reproduce better. So it's a trait that's been selected for in the same way that all these other traits we talk about are selected for. Cooperation is very much selected for. And we can talk about it in terms of, I've actually had this conversation lots of times from a theological perspective when we talk about morality and our understanding of right and wrong. And that, is this just a special gift from God that we have morality, or could it have evolved? And I would argue very much so that it evolved. For us to be moral, those who were moral were kept in society, were much more likely to find a mate and reproduce. So I don't think that means it wasn't a God-given gift. Right? I think that it was very purposeful that we have this ability to cooperate, but God needed a way to do it. And evolution is a great way to bring about cooperativity.
That makes sense. And Marcia actually just wanted to ask if human traits are quirks of evolution as well. Are some human traits random quirks? I think that's a fun question.
And I would say yes, for sure. There's a lot of things that are not perfect about humans that are just part of the process. But then there's a lot of things that I think are very purposeful. Like, I don't want to take God out of this. I think that the way that we behave and the ability we have to cooperate in such a far beyond all other species on our planet, we have this ability. And I don't think that's an accident, but there's a lot of things. And actually, if you read my book, we go through a whole chapter on like psychopathologies, mental health issues that are very much in your genetics, that are quirks of evolution and random mutations that are just part of mortality, right? Like, we were sent down here to learn things and to learn how to overcome barriers. That means there have to be barriers. And a lot of these barriers are just a part of our human bodies. And they're a beautiful part of our human bodies. That there are flaws and quirks, like your tailbone, right? Total flaw. We fall, we break it. Sometimes it breaks in childbirth. Like, it's not an ideal feature, but it's just part of having a mortal body that can teach us so many things. So yeah, I would say yes, a lot of human traits are just quirks of our evolution. Yeah.
Phil, I know with the delay, I feel like sometimes you haven't been able to say, is there anything? I just want to make sure you get to ask any follow-up questions that maybe you haven't been able to squeeze in with the funny delay.
I want to know what scene or lack of scene in the movie or story in the movie that was in the book that was not included, or was included but in a way that wasn't completely accurate to the book. What were you wishing, or what was the one thing you was missing the most to you in that?
Oh man, that's a good question. I think a lot of the details of the science that he was doing were missing, that I was so sad that the whole experiment of breeding them, and then the fact that they ate his tank, right? Because if you remember when they were trying to collect the Talmiba, his tank explodes and the Talmiba get inside and they eat up his fuel and they actually destroy part of that tank. And so part of his tank is actually made of xenonite. So Rocky was not the only one in trouble when he discovered that the Talmiba would eat through the tank. And that was missing. Also, the whole idea that the sacrifice that Grace made for Rocky, which I think was such a beautiful part of the book, was missing from the film. You saw him go back for him, but you didn't see the struggle that he went through where he tried to figure out how much food he still had. And there was this very real dilemma that Grace had, that when he went back to save Rocky, he was going to starve to death. There was and in fact, in the book, he tries to eat some of the dead astrophage for calories and trying to figure out how long he could live. And so you do see in the book that he makes this sacrifice for Rocky, but you don't understand the full magnitude. When Grace made this sacrifice, he was 100% sure that he would starve to death. And then you see him I don't want to spoil it all, but then you see that he does survive, right? But that was not apparent to him when he made that sacrifice. And so that, to me, I was like, oh, the ending was just not quite as climactic, idiomatic as it could have been had you seen the details of the struggle that he went through to make that decision. So I don't know. For me, that was the big one.
Love it. Love it.
Okay, well, gosh, there's so many things we could talk about. We could go on for hours and hours, but just to wrap up, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave us with?
Let me see. Final thoughts. I don't know. If you haven't read the book, you should read the book. The science in it is really pretty phenomenal, and it teaches you a lot about human nature and about evolution that I think is just fascinating.
Okay, I've only seen the movie, so I'll make sure to read the book. Yeah. Okay, let's finish up with our 3 signature questions.
The first question is, what is one thing you think our listeners can start doing today to bless the earth, whether in the spirit of Project Hail Mary or otherwise?
Yeah, and I actually was thinking about this a lot, and I think in the spirit of Hail Mary, it is to think bigger than yourself. And that's like not actually doing anything. It's more of a paradigm shift that I think a lot of us have to have, that we are part of a bigger system. And the things that we do, even little things, matter either positively or negatively. Like, I think we need to not discount the positive effects that we have on the system around us. But I think we often think of ourselves as somehow set apart from nature, whether you don't think humans evolved or whether you think humans are somehow a special case where the rules don't apply to us, is not true, right? Humans are very much a part of the system, and just thinking bigger than yourself is that first step into figuring out what you can do to make the earth better.
Beautiful. And we talked in the intro about how we can pray to know what's the place we can start. And God can help us. God knows the most impactful and easiest place for us to start. So I love that. Okay, our next question is, where was the last place you felt a deep sense of awe and wonder?
So I am lucky. I live down in Hunters Valley in Springville, down in the river bottoms. And when I walk out my front door, I see Spanish Fork Peak, the mountain, and I swear it changes every day. And I cannot tell you how many pictures I have on my phone of that mountain. And I remember when we first moved into that house thinking, I know this will eventually get old and I'll be really sad. But so far, we've been there 16 years. And every time I open my door, I pull my phone out just about every time and take a picture of that mountain. So I get to feel it every day.
Beautiful. And that's probably, like you said, because it is changing, but also I think there's some spiritual work there of, continuing to see with new eyes. So that's beautiful. Okay. So our last question is, how has your commitment to earth stewardship brought you closer to God?
I think just recognizing that everything around me is a creation of God makes me just more appreciative of what He's done for us. Like I said, walking out my front door every morning and seeing that mountain, I just can't help but feel like God was just saying, "Hey, Jamie, I see you. You want to see something beautiful?" So I think, yeah, the more you're aware of all of these creations around you, the more gratitude I have, at least.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Jamie. This was so fun and interesting to explore Project Hail Mary and hear
Talk
some
about
of
it
your
all night.
perspectives. I know there's so
I
many
love this
cool things.
story.
So thank you so much for your time. It was such a treat to have you.
Thank you.
Okay, Phil is in a very remote part of Iceland and the Wi-Fi dropped out, so we're getting Marcia to help finish out the episode. Thanks, Marcia.
Yeah. So I wanted to share some listener feedback. And this is a comment from YouTube about our interview with Graham Winkle, who moved from England. If you guys recall, if you haven't watched that episode, go and watch it. But he moved from England to the northern tip of Scotland with his family, and they built a sustainable farm, which in that part of the world is called a croft. And one of our viewers, Ian S., wrote, I feel a little guilty listening to this. The Winkles have managed to create a forest garden in the most inhospitable environment. I haven't even managed to grow tomatoes here in Texas and had decided that the effort wasn't worth it. Now I'm resolving to give it another try. So I identified with Ian S. on that
Totally.
comment because sometimes we Earth stewards feel a little guilty that we're not doing everything. So how do you feel about that, Lydia?
That totally resonates with me. There are so many good things to do, and we don't even have time to do them all, let alone the ability. Like I love gardening, but I don't think I'm a great gardener. So I totally that is exactly how I feel, where there are things that feel like they should be easy, but they're still not. But a couple times in this episode, this idea has come up of like, okay, just tune in to the spirit and God can help direct you on like what thing matters the most for you right now. And I think we can kind of rest at ease knowing if I'm listening to the spirit and doing like the one next good thing, then I'm doing what I need to do. So
yeah, I agree. And the other thing too, I feel is like sometimes comparison is difficult for us. So if we can look at others and see them and be inspired by them, we don't have to feel beaten down. I know it's difficult, but we don't have to feel beaten down by other people, what they're doing. We can be inspired by it to do something, to stretch.
I love it. Well, thank you, Ian, so much for your comment. We would love to hear from everyone and create a community where we can support each other as Earth stewards. So please reach out to us by commenting on YouTube or by emailing hello@holyearthpodcast.com. If this content resonates with you or you find it useful, please subscribe to our feed on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok @HolyEarthPodcast. And if you would like to get involved with Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship, visit our website at ldsearthstewardship.org and sign up for our newsletter.
Holy Earth is brought to you by Latter-day Saint Earth Stewardship, a 501c3 nonprofit whose mission is to honor God by learning and living Latter-day Saint principles of creation care and with the support of a generous donation from the Nature Conservancy. Our executive producer is Mike Maxwell, and our producer is Marcia Maxwell. Our theme music was composed and performed by Lydia Theobald. Our logo and graphic design are by Annie Peterson.